podcast, I'll explore some of the least crap. Probably do. Having this on from the beginning is probably a good idea. Welcome to Boring Crimes, the least Okay, let's try that again. Fresh start. Welcome to Boring Crimes, the least sensational true crime podcast out there. I'm your host, Matthew Benjamin Comstock. On this podcast, I will explore some of the least interesting crimes covered by our local news and take as deep a dive as possible into the lurid details of the pettiest wrongdoings. There is no mystery too solvable, no incident too explainable for boring crimes. Okay, I think that one is usable. Harder than I thought. Okay. Well, might as well get into it. Don't know if I'll use all this. Guess I can always cut. Thanks for joining me on Boring Crimes. No, really, thanks. I appreciate the fact that you're listening to something with boring in the title, which is probably a testament to exactly how desperate we all are for something to entertain us. But make no mistake, the name of this podcast is not about self-deprecation. Most true crime podcasts, very understandably, focus on the big-ticket items. Some might dig through cold cases looking for something fresh, or explore the real incidents behind folktales and murder ballads. They're all interesting to begin with, especially if, they're utterly monstrous. Right from the start, there's something awful and compelling. The narrative is right there, ready for you to grab. I wanted to do something a little different. Something I've noticed is that there are two ways to make a story interesting. There's the main plot, the who, what, and where, and if the big facts are weird enough, well, most of the work is done for you. $200K in cheese stolen? There's your headline right there. A war between rival criminal tow truck companies resulting in arson. Low-hanging fruit. But there's another way these stories get interesting. That's in the details. I think if you look closely enough, everything eventually crystallizes into a narrative. We live in biological time, and we have beginnings, middles, and ends. Say there's an ordinary bit of vandalism. Someone's car gets keyed. Boring. Barely worth noting. But when you look closer, you find out the guy keying those cars in fact keys every white Escalade he ever sees because his wife ran off with someone who drove one, so he scratches up all those paint jobs just on the off chance it belongs to them. I'm not saying all petty criminal activity has a secret tragedy behind it, but then again, maybe it does. I want to see what happens if you look real close at something that would usually make your eyes glaze over. Stuff you'd barely notice. If you dig into the details, what emerges? Will deeper layers of mystery reveal themselves? Or will the motivations be unexpectedly complicated and heartrending? Or will each detail be boringer than the last? I'm not sure how this is going to go. Things may turn out to be even duller than anticipated, but maybe, just maybe, when we look at the details, there'll be a real devil in them. For the very first boring crime, I had a few potential candidates. The first one might not have had a lot of inherent tension to it, but it is pretty weird. Just a few blocks from my place, somebody keeps pooping in the middle of the sidewalk, right in front of a local corner store with alarming regularity. Everyone living nearby knows about it, and with all our amateur sleuthing and note comparing, a few neighbors have figured out when it's happening.
I'm a bartender. I get home around 4:30 a.m. every morning, and the sidewalk's poop-free.
Well, I go for my run every morning around 6:15, and I always see that dang turd.
Clearly, there is some kind of grudge afoot. Across the city, a pair of warring pizzerias are accusing each other of using bathtub cheese that's being illegally made in small local batches instead of officially licensed and regulated stuff. While this might seem like small potatoes, or mini mozzarellas, these are serious allegations in the pizza business. Both restaurateurs were ready to rake their rival across the coals. Cheese is the white gold in the restaurant business, one of the shop owners declared in a recent interview about the ongoing feud. Clearly, that rivalry and the alleged dairy fraud is much deeper than a bathtub. But in the end, I picked the boringest crime I could find: library fines. I came across a few articles about libraries that were forgiving fines and ceasing to charge them during the pandemic. It was a matter of accessibility, many of them stated, to help more folks use library services. One such piece by Dave Dormer noted, removing barriers and ensuring that all citizens, especially children, are not held back from benefiting from the library is the right thing to do. But try to return your materials on time so other people can use them. Closer to home, another piece about library fine forgiveness anonymously listed some of their greatest offenders. Even these monsters who had amassed huge fees would find their debts forgiven. And that's where I found it. And the greatest offender, the article stated, had kept multiple copies of 1001 Nights for so long, including rare editions via interlibrary loan, that one had to imagine they were reading them at the same pace they were allegedly told. It seemed just perfect for a first episode. The city's largest library fine. After all, what could possibly be more boring than a library? The Great Library Fine of 2020. Were it a single old book, the fees wouldn't have accrued nearly so quickly. But it turns out there are a lot of versions of this book, easily replaceable paperbacks and rare editions, copies in other languages, competing translations that told the stories slightly differently. Some were only supposed to have been loaned out for a short, controlled window of time, strictly observed by interlibrary loans. When taken all together, all those fees added up fast, and within a few months, someone had racked up the largest fine in the library's history. When the library chose to forgive all their loans a few months into the pandemic, even this massive offense would have been met with clemency. No matter how much time and how many holds were placed against the books, they could be returned without fear, starting with a clean slate. But when I inquired, the library confirmed that months after their offer of mercy, all those books had yet to appear. Why would someone who had committed such a huge offense against literature not take what might be their only chance to be forgiven? When the librarian in question let slip the book hoarder's name, I Googled it. I expected it would turn up a graduate student's bio on a lab website somewhere. But I found something else entirely, or rather, didn't find, and quickly realized why the offender hadn't appeared. Earlier this spring, just before lockdown, when the university hadn't closed yet, a very ordinary missing persons case made the barest flash in the news cycle and then vanished in the tide of everything else. A news story or two appeared, and a few colleagues shared the links, asking if anyone had seen her. Their concern seemed genuine, but was heartbreakingly short-lived. Soon, everyone seemed to forget about her entirely under the deluge of more pressing world events, and soon the only person that seemed to miss her was the library. And even then, they really just missed the books. Now this was exactly the kind of story I was hoping to find. We started with a late fine, and we're already at a missing persons case. And so, the Great Library Fine of 2020 becomes The Disappearance of Alice. In late February 2020, a university student stopped showing up to her English classes. I'm just going to use her first name for a nod to anonymity, I guess. The young woman, identified in the news reports as Alice, is a humanities major living in off-campus dorm housing. The TA for her Victorian literature course, Sharon Pal, said she kept attendance religiously and showed no other unexcused absences, just one missed class due to illness that Alice had conscientiously emailed her about in advance. The following week, Alice missed a second class in a row. Banerjee told me that she made a note to email the student and warn her that a third absence would affect her participation grade, but got overwhelmed during her office hours immediately following the class. TAs are overworked at the best of times, so it's understandable that they couldn't keep track of every student, but those closer to Alice weren't any better at looking out for her. Alice's flatmates, who asked in the few articles I saw not to be identified, were used to not seeing her very much. The adjective used to describe her most often in the very few reports that exist of the incident is quiet. She stayed in her suite a great deal, they said, didn't use the common areas much, she was often studying or working by herself somewhere. It was only when they started spending more time confined to their residence, as the idea of social distancing began to take root, that it occurred to them they hadn't seen Alice in some time. Still, they weren't close to her, who they'd only been living with for a few months, and assumed she was traveling or had gone home for a visit and simply not mentioned it. And there seemed to be no one else. No one could point to Alice's family or close friends. No one could remember ever meeting or hearing about someone significant in her life. And even when she went missing, no one stepped forward as next of kin. Or even third of kin, really. When the announcement was made that classes would be canceled, possibly for some time, and students were to vacate dorm rooms as soon as they could, both of her flatmates decided to weather the pandemic at their parents' homes out of town. As they prepared for the trip, Alice still did not return to their apartment to pack up her things. When they inquired about her plans, since they weren't sure when they or anyone would be back, they got the little dots that said Alice was typing a reply, but her responses never arrived. Only then did it really sink in that something might be wrong. Her flatmates contacted security just before locking up their apartment and carpooling out of the city. They reported their flatmate missing, stated that nothing had happened at all, and she hadn't been acting any differently. They just stopped seeing her at some point. They couldn't say exactly when, and left before an in-person interview could be requested. I attempted to follow up with campus security, but at the time of this recording, all of my messages had gone unanswered.
Thank you for calling campus security. If this is an emergency, please hang up and call 911. At present, the campus security office remains on reduced hours, as classes are canceled until the end of the semester and most on-campus housing has been vacated. One of our staff will get back to you as soon as possible. If you require a swifter response, please contact the police non-emergency line at 411. Thank you, and take care.
In the rush to get students and staff prepared for the lockdown, which initially seemed like it would be brief, but soon stretched on into an uncertain future, campus security had a great deal on their plates. Alice's disappearance might have been more of a priority otherwise, but from the perfunctory reports, it seemed like almost an afterthought. The security officers reported that they entered Alice's apartment to conduct a wellness check and found nothing out of the ordinary, save that her flatmates had taken a significant number of their belongings, whereas her room was untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, nothing seemed amiss, except for the fact that she was gone. Alice had no emergency contact information on her student file, and while both local police and campus security posted social media notices and contacted the local media to try and reach any next of kin, her disappearance received very little coverage, and the search for her got almost no pickup. I'd say it was weird how little everyone cared, but when you think about it, it's bleakly understandable. With a global event in full swing, the disappearance of one young woman with few social contacts to speak of barely made a ripple. It seemed like a complete dead end, and for a while, I thought I might have to abandon this story and return to the thing about the corner store and the poop. I was just about to call it quits and decided, either as a last-ditch effort or a farewell, I'm honestly not sure, to walk by the residence building where Alice lived, as though an ugly hunk of brick and bedbugs might whisper to me a secret. I snapped a picture from the sidewalk, and the building didn't even have the decency to have any ghosts looking out of the windows. There was, however, something on the front door, a notice that several apartments were scheduled to be cleared out. I'll have a copy of it up online sometime this week. But for now, it informed the former occupants that they had until September 1st to get the stuff that had been left behind, or it would all be chucked in a dumpster so the room could be cleaned for next semester's students. If this was Alice's building, it meant one of those rooms due to be cleaned out was her apartment. The things that were going to be thrown in a dumpster were all of the worldly possessions that she had left behind. But that was all I found. After those few articles, anemic little news stories devoid of much substance, there was no follow-up. No updates, no pleas from terrified parents or grieving friends, no organizing of search parties, just a big empty space where a person used to be. Well, that's not entirely true, is it? There was one more thing I found. Her library finds. So get this. The library at the school she studied at, where she disappeared, didn't connect the fact that this girl wasn't returning her library books because she had gone missing. It all came together in my head, these few pieces I could find, and I'm not sure. It sparked my curiosity and made me certain I was on the right track. No one cared enough to connect even these few far apart dots, and it hit me that if I could put these things together in a few minutes of Googling, I might be able to discover a lot more. Enough, perhaps, to make a few podcast episodes out of. And I knew that the key to this story, wherever it might lead, was somewhere in that lonely, soon-to-be trashed apartment. The next step is, unquestionably, how are we going to get in that dorm room? There are many extremely likely scenarios that could explain her disappearance. Alice may have gone home earlier than her flatmates were aware of to shelter from the pandemic with other friends or family. She may have had a romantic partner neither of them knew about, whom she moved away with. She could have simply dropped out of her program due to stress, like countless university students who fall through the cracks. But it's also possible that something more sinister happened here, that with worldwide panic, one individual tragedy was overlooked like so many others. On Boring Crimes, we're going to delve as deeply as we can into the disappearance of Alice and see what we can find when we look at every aspect in great detail. Will a story come to the surface, or will the simplest explanation turn out to be true? We'll find out together on forthcoming episodes. Ooh, okay. There you have it. Boring Crimes is happening. Hope this turns out to be a little interesting at all, but I guess I can always just delete it. Okay, serious outro time. Thank you all for joining me for the first episode of Boring Crimes, The Disappearance of Alice. In future episodes, I'll dig more deeply into the details of this case like a prospector panning in a river, and we'll find out together if there's any gold to be found here. Remember to subscribe to Boring Crimes, and follow me on Instagram at Boring Crimes Podcast for all the latest updates. Until the next clues are revealed, be well, stay safe, and stay inside. Cool. I'm gonna edit you later. Maybe test the mic, see how it sounds.